As dusk descends, we gently turn our gaze to one of humanity's most ancient narratives, the profound and enigmatic tale of the Anunnaki. For those unfamiliar, these divine beings first emerged from the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia over 4 millennia ago. Their presence graced creation myths, epic poetry, and royal decrees, forming, in essence, the very bedrock of Sumerian and Akkadian spiritual life. What lends the Anunnaki their unique resonance is the remarkable way their story has been reimagined through the ages. The Babylonians envisioned them as companions to deities like Marduk and Ishtar. Later, Assyrian writings assigned them fresh responsibilities. In recent times, they have found a new home in modern theories concerning forgotten civilizations and even celestial visitors. From the earliest imprints on clay to the pages of contemporary thought, the Anunnaki have journeyed through an extraordinary expanse of time. As ever, I find myself wondering from which corner of our world you are listening, and what hour it marks for you. Whether you are gently settling into sleep, or simply curious about how ancient myths can softly echo through the corridors of time, I am deeply glad you are here. Let us now begin this exploration. To envision the dawn of urban life, let us not begin with the grandeur of marble columns or precisely paved avenues. Instead, picture a vast, flat expanse at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates, a land touched by shimmering mud and restless waters, which today forms much of southern Iraq. Each spring, the rivers would swell, gently branching into ever-shifting channels, leaving behind a fertile silt capable of nurturing grain in astonishing abundance. Yet, these floods were capricious. One year they might recede too soon. Another, they could lay waste to the fields. For survival, people patiently learned to guide the waters through intricate ditches and embankments. From this quiet, persistent struggle with the earth and the passage of time, something profoundly new began to emerge in human history. What were once humble clusters of reed huts blossomed into towns, graced with canals, storehouses, sacred shrines, and bustling quaysides. A select few of these towns then grew into true cities. This sacred ground we now know as Sumer. Archaeologists tenderly name the eras of Sumer, as if turning the pages of a deeply cherished, ancient book. The Ubaid period unveiled early temples, pottery adorned with delicate paintings, and the first whispers of organized irrigation. The Uruk period gracefully followed, commencing around the 4th millennium before our Common Era, and with it the very first city we can truly behold in vivid detail. Uruk itself blossomed into a metropolis by ancient standards, perhaps cradling tens of thousands of souls, a truly astonishing thought, considering that only a few centuries prior, their forebears still hunted wild pigs and gathered reeds along the marsh's tranquil edge. Uruk possessed distinct districts, monumental platforms reaching towards the heavens, and serene temple compounds. Within its embrace were workshops where potters, metal workers, and weavers plied their crafts, alongside administrators gifted with an innate wisdom for managing the communal grain. Uruk's silhouette, if one could call it that, ascended in gentle tiers of brick. A sacred precinct was lovingly dedicated to Inanna, the mistress of love, war, and civic spirit, and another to An, the sky god, whose revered name would softly echo through the coming centuries. Upon a high platform, a whitewashed temple stood, catching the sun's tender embrace for miles across the wide plain. Citizens ascended processional stairways, bearing humble offerings of barley, beer, and dates. Priests diligently tended sacred fires and inscribed their thoughts upon wet clay. The city hummed with the gentle symphony of 1,000 small industries. Kilns softly roared, millstones rhythmically rasped, and goats gently bleated in lanes dappled by the shade of date palms. At the quays, barges from upstream gracefully unloaded timber and stone, precious commodities the alluvial plain could not offer on its own. It was here that writing began to take on its recognizable form, a quiet revolution. For generations, people had carefully marked tallies on clay tokens, shaped like simple cones and spheres. Then, within Uruk, officials began to press delicate signs into clay tablets with sharpened reeds. Initially, these were humble records of rations and deliveries. Soon, however, they evolved to capture names, places, and actions. These delicate wedge marks are what we now reverently call cuneiform. What began as a mere ledger blossomed into literature, law, and profound myth. Over the span of a few centuries, scribes progressed from simply listing sheep to eloquently recording hymns and the majestic deeds of kings. One day, someone quietly drew the very first map on clay, a small miracle that perhaps went unnoticed at the time. The Sumerians structured their entire world around the city temple, its heart. The temple owned fields, canals, herds, and workshops. It thoughtfully rationed beer to its workers and held the precious keys to the granary. To manage water and orchestrate labor, a gentle hierarchy naturally emerged. Titles took shape. An ensi was a city governor, a devoted steward of the divine. A lugal was a king, literally a big man, who stood as the city's protector in times of war and in the forging of treaties. He was not a god, yet he could tenderly speak to the gods on behalf of his people. Councils gathered in peaceful courtyards, deciding everything from the clearing of canals to the delicate resolution of boundary disputes. As one reads the ancient tablets, the very rhythm of civic life seems to softly resonate. Send this many men to dredge this stretch of the canal, they might say. Deliver this many baskets of barley to the temple brewery. Repair the quay before the date harvest. Other cities, too, rose gracefully along the rivers. Nippur became a spiritual heart, where the great gods were said to convene, and where kings sought their divine blessing for their rule. Eridu, far to the south, on the ancient Gulf shore, boasted a sacred lineage that the Sumerians cherished as the oldest in the land. Flourished near the river mouth, later building a ziggurat so magnificent it would still inspire awe in travelers 2 millennia hence. Lagash grew mighty, its scribes recording land surveys and legal reforms under a ruler named Urukagina, who, with a burst of noble civic spirit, sought to protect widows and curb the excesses of officials. Kish watched over the northern approaches, appearing repeatedly in early royal lists, hinting at the quiet authority of a gatekeeper. Sumer itself possessed few trees, little stone, and no copper within its soil. Yet, its people yearned for all three. So, they traded. Boats glided along canals, out to the river, and onto the Gulf, then journeying to Dilmun, which most scholars place in Bahrain and along the eastern Arabian coast. There, they acquired copper from the land they called Magan, likely Oman, and shipped it home as gleaming ingots. They deeply coveted lapis lazuli, a blue stone that traveled from far beyond Elam and the Zagros, likely from Afghanistan, through long, patient chains of exchange. Cedar came from the mountains of the Levant and the Taurus. In return, Sumer offered its finely woven woolen textiles, carefully processed foods, and artfully crafted goods. A potter in Uruk could transform humble clay into trade goods that paid for the copper tools used to dig the canals that watered the fields that, in turn, fed the potter. It was the very first blossoming of a complex economy ever recorded. Agriculture was the gentle pulse of everything. The soil was generous, yet subtly demanding. Without careful watering, it would harden into a tough crust. With too much water and inadequate drainage, it would gather salt, stunting the precious barley. The Sumerians learned to rotate crops, gently flush fields, and carve new channels when old ones became slow. They measured time for their labors using the sexagesimal system, a base 6-0 way of counting that still graces our hours with 60 minutes and our circles with 360 degrees. They meticulously compiled lists of professions and plants, tablet after tablet. There were words for countless types of canals, different grades of beer, and various kinds of reeds for mats and ropes. It is the rich vocabulary of a people who understood that survival itself depended on knowing how to tenderly name all that they used. Religion was not a separate realm from this daily rhythm. It infused every aspect of it. Each city placed a patron deity at the very heart of its identity. Inanna stood for Uruk. Enki, the clever lord of waters, gently presided at Eridu. Nana, the moon god, watched over Ur. Enlil, the profound force of air and authority, had his grand temple at Nippur, where kings came to receive the sacred token of rule. People did not visit shrines merely out of habit. They deeply believed the gods partook of offerings, guided omens, and decided which endeavors would gently flourish. Festivals drew entire populations into the streets to sing, carry sacred statues, and mark the turning of the seasons. When a canal held firm, when a harvest surpassed all expectation, when a caravan returned safely intact, the credit was lovingly attributed first to the gods. In these nascent centuries, we begin to perceive the tender outlines of a divine family, whom the Sumerians called the princely seed, the very offspring of the sky. While their specific members might gently shift from city to city and across the turning centuries, the core belief remained beautifully simple. The world is not a realm of chance. Instead, it is lovingly organized under a grand council of potent beings, who lovingly assign roles to other gods and tasks to humankind. This august council is what later texts would come to know as the Anunnaki. At this early juncture, the name served more as a sacred designation for the highest deities of the pantheon, rather than a fixed, rigid list. What truly resonated was the profound sense of order. Just as temple administrators meticulously divided fields and water rights, so too did this divine assembly, envisioned on a far grander plane, apportion realms and destinies. Sumerian art captures this inherent order with a captivating tenderness. Cylinder seals, carved with exquisite detail, depict gentle processions of worshippers, joyous banquets, musicians, diligent plowmen, and officials humbly receiving a rod and ring from a seated deity. Reliefs showcase horned crowns and flowing beards, unmistakable symbols of their divine majesty. The gods often bore a majestic resemblance to humans, for the people who sculpted them sought to comprehend the divine through familiar forms. A sun god might tenderly hold a saw-toothed symbol of justice, for sunlight gently reveals what lies hidden. A river god pours water from a jar, mirroring the life-giving flow of rivers in a world crafted from clay and canals. From this rich and complex tapestry of life, lore and memory slowly unfolded. The earliest surviving law codes, emerging later in their tradition, would appear in and beyond. Yet their spirit already whispered from the administrative tablets of the Uruk and early dynastic periods. Contracts carefully recorded loans paid in barley. Oaths invoked deities to ensure honest weights. Land transfers meticulously described precise field edges, referencing canals and sacred boundary stones. One can almost feel a society learning to place its trust in the written word as deeply as the spoken one, a quiet revolution in itself. War, though unwelcome, was a sorrowful, recurring thread in their story. Cities often quarreled over precious water and fertile territory. Armies marched with heavy hearts along canal banks. Troops pulled battle wagons with their solid wooden wheels, their presence a stark contrast to the peaceful fields. Fortified walls rose around cities, casting their brick weight against the distant horizon. Victory stelae recorded outcomes with stark, unyielding clarity. In one renowned fragment from later centuries, a king of Lagash proudly recounts reclaiming a border ditch and erecting a stone that meticulously lists field distances with a surveyor's tender care. These concerns, though seemingly earthly, were profoundly foundational. For who controls the head of a canal, controls the very breath of thousands. So, what truly made Sumer the cradle of civilization, more than just a name, cities and writing? Yes, but also the beautiful understanding that human endeavor and divine favor, intertwined, could render a precarious land truly livable. The Sumerians embraced a marshy delta and lovingly transformed it into a vibrant network of fields and towns, sustaining artisans and scribes, priests and merchants. They learned to turn grain into nourishing beer and surplus into vital trade. They built, brick by brick, a deep belief that the universe possessed an inherent order, and that cities could beautifully mirror this order if they organized themselves with wisdom and care. From this rich matrix, the stories of the gods began to take on their unique, sacred forms. People would look up from their ledgers and their canals and gently ask, who, then, set the very rules of this world in the first place? The Sumerians, in their profound wisdom, commenced their cosmic narrative on the grandest possible scale. Before human hands ever delved to carve the first canal, before a scribe's gentle touch pressed a sign into wet clay, there existed a singular, undifferentiated mass of sky and earth. They tenderly named the sky An, and the earth Ki. Imagine a seamless, unbroken unity that yearned to be parted, so that a sacred space might open for life to blossom. This profound division marks the very first act in their cosmic history. From the sacred union of An and Ki, a family of gods came forth. Their cherished name for this divine clan was the Anunnaki, meaning the princely seed or the offspring of An. In essence, these were not distant, ethereal spirits, but a royal household, born from the intimate embrace of sky and earth. The Sumerians envisioned them as a revered council. They would gather, engage in discourse, and reach solemn decisions that would lovingly shape the very pattern of the world. When a king ascended his throne, when a river gently altered its course, when a city flourished in prosperity, it was understood to be by the sacred decree of these great gods. At the heart of this divine assembly stood Enlil, the profound force of air and authority. Sumerian poems whisper that he tenderly separated heaven and earth, claiming the earth as his own sacred realm, while his father, An, retained the boundless sky. This was not a violent struggle, as later myths might portray such scenes, but rather an act of profound creation, bringing forth order. From that hallowed moment, the world unfolded into distinct layers: the high, ethereal dome where En serenely presides, the middle ground where Enlil gently rules over fields, cities, wind, and storm, and the deep, mysterious waters beneath, belonging to a power entirely distinct. That power is Enki, whom Akkadian texts lovingly call Ea. He is the benevolent lord of fresh water, wisdom, and ingenious craft. His sacred home is Eridu, a city the Sumerians revered as the oldest seat of worship. They pictured his temple standing gracefully near the edge of marsh and sea, where the sweet embrace of fresh water met the vastness of the salt. Enki appears time and again as the wise god who gently resolves dilemmas. He thoughtfully shapes plans, assigns vital functions, and ingeniously seeks clever pathways to sustain the cosmic order when others have perhaps faltered. Ninhursag, too, stands with them at the dawn of creation. She is the great lady of the sacred mountain, a nurturing mother figure who presides over birth, growth, and the vibrant vitality of the land. In some traditions, she is the very essence of Ki, the first generation, embodying Earth under a personal name. In others, she is a distinct mother goddess who collaborates with Enki when life yearns for a maker. When Sumerians speak of lovingly shaping humankind from clay, they often place Ninhursag beside the creator, her presence steady and capable. Around these guiding figures stand other cherished children of the sky. Nana, also known as Sin in Akkadian, is the moon god whose luminous bark gracefully traverses the night sky. His grand temple rose in Ur, and its devoted priests charted the months by his gentle waxing and waning light. Utu, later called Shamash, is the radiant sun and the just judge who sees all. His cult center at Sippar and Lhasa beautifully linked justice with the daily light. Inanna, known as Ishtar in later texts, embodies love, passionate intensity, and the sharp edges of war. Her temple district in Uruk was renowned for its wealth, song, and vibrant pageantry. Each of these deities belongs to this high, sacred family. Each carries a domain that gently mirrors something essential in daily Sumerian life. As one contemplates how these stories unfold, a careful, intricate design becomes apparent. The divine family serves both as a profound map of nature and a gentle model of governance, and sits above, a serene figurehead who rarely intervenes directly. Enlil governs the middle world with gentle force and sacred decrees. Enki offers counsel and invents, softly easing conflicts with his wit and craft. Ninhursag bestows form and enduring strength. The younger gods gracefully execute tasks that align with their inherent natures. Utu brings forth justice, for sunlight reveals and clarifies all. Nana marks time, for the moon is a celestial clock one can trust with your very gaze. Inanna animates the tender bonds of humanity and its fierce conflicts, for both belong to the vibrant heat of life itself. The pantheon is not a mere list. It is a living, working chart. The word Anunnaki does not confine itself to a single, fixed roster. In one ancient composition, one might find 7 named as the most senior. In another, a wider assembly is called by the same revered title. What remains constant is the profound understanding that these are the great gods, the high court that lovingly assigns destinies. When a text mentions the Anunnaki sat, it implies that these great powers gathered and reached a binding, sacred decision. The Sumerians tenderly imagined this council convening at Nippur, Enlil's holy city, where kings would come to seek the sacred tokens of legitimate rule. In ritual terms, a ruler's authority became truly real when the cosmic bureaucracy softly uttered its yes. Art gracefully supports this vision. The horned crown gently marks a god. The rod and ring in a divine hand signify the sacred gift of measured authority. Cylinder seals beautifully depict a seated deity, conferring signs of rule upon a human official, who approaches with pure hands and a humbly averted gaze. In these profound scenes, one can discern the same gentle social grammar that permeates temple accounts and boundary stones. The cosmos is orderly. Rank holds significance. Powers are gracefully delegated. Duties are assigned to tenderly fit the task and the season. Poems and hymns often lovingly list the me, a term we can translate as the divine ordinances of culture and nature. These are the very attributes and functions that allow civilization to gently unfold. Temple building, kingship, music, weaving, truth, victory, and even paradoxical aspects like strife are counted among the me. In one famous narrative, Enki gathers the me within his shrine at Eridu. Inanna journeys there and, in a lively, spirited exchange, obtains a set of them, carrying them back to Uruk. The tale is playful, yet its message is deeply serious. Civilized life depends on a structured, sacred package of powers that the gods control and can lovingly distribute. This cosmic order also requires a place for profound judgment. The Sumerians believed fate to be a fixed thread once it was spoken by the council. Enlil is often revered as the one who decrees destinies. In other texts, the entire assembly of the Anunnaki is said to have spoken the outcomes of ages and kings. This is how a mythic universe maintains its stability, not through a constant stream of miracles, but through a shared, sacred understanding among the highest beings about how things are meant to gently unfold. Geography tenderly anchors this theology. Nippur is the sacred seat of Enlil and the grand stage for high decisions. Eridu holds Enki's sweet waters and becomes the cherished source of crafts and wisdom. Keeps the sacred time of the moon, transforming that time into calendars and festivals. Uruk celebrates Inanna, binding beauty and might to civic life. Sippar and Lhasa shine for Utu, linking sunlight to law. When you map these cities, you are, in essence, mapping the very body of the pantheon across the wide plain. One truly striking detail is how profoundly human the gods can appear, without ever losing their majestic grandeur. They partake of offerings. They wear flowing robes and precious jewelry. They ride in solemn processions. They take offense and gently reconcile. They act like a beloved royal house whose moods hold deep significance for everyone who lives within their realm. This is not because Sumerians lacked the capacity for abstraction. It is because they yearned for a world that could be gently addressed. A farmer burdened with a problem needed a god who could listen and act. A king, seeking a sign, looked for a council that could vote. If one wished to encounter the Anunnaki in their diligent work, the journey would lovingly begin at Nippur. Not the city as archaeologists now carefully unearth it, but the vibrant, living place that once nestled at the gentle bend of a canal. Picture wide, serene courts paved with beaten clay, doorways gracefully framed with cedar beams, and a magnificent terrace where Enlil's temple gently lifted its brick shoulders above the peaceful plain. Priests moved with quiet dignity through these courts, reed bundles held tenderly in their arms. Scribes pressed tablets upon their laps, and messengers carried small, sealed jars, holding precious oil for lamps and offerings. For a Sumerian, Nippur was more than a mere city. It was the sacred meeting point of earth and the unseen, the hallowed ground where the great gods gathered to lovingly decide the unfolding of the year. The Anunnaki operated as a true council, their rule not born of accident or fleeting whim. They sat in solemn assembly and issued their sacred decrees. The word that resonates so often through ancient texts is destiny. Once spoken by this revered council, a destiny was considered fixed, immutable. A king who held his throne with graceful ease was understood to be one whose path had been blessed in that divine court. A king who struggled, perhaps, had not found the favor he so deeply sought. If a river gently carved a new channel, sparing a district from the sorrow of flood, people whispered that the Anunnaki had so decreed it. When troubles arose, the plea would ascend through prayer and heartfelt offering, in the tender hope that the council might reconsider. The Sumerians possessed a deep appreciation for order, and this love for structure beautifully manifested in their theology. Poets spoke of the me, the divine ordinances that render civilization possible. These are the very building blocks of culture itself. Music finds its place on this sacred list, as do weaving, bricklaying, fair judgment, and the sacred institution of kingship. The Anunnaki hold these profound powers. They can lovingly bestow them, gently withdraw them, or gracefully pass them from one city to another. In the myth scholars call Enki and the world order. Enki journeys through the lands, tenderly assigning oversight to various gods. Grain and cattle receive their patient keepers. Rivers are granted their watchful guardians. Marshes, mountains, and sea coasts are entrusted to deities whose natures perfectly align with them. It is a harmonious vision, for the Sumerians deeply believed that a well-ordered cosmos was a livable, thriving one. When a new ruler assumed office, he did not merely claim a seat. He came to Nippur for sacred recognition. The ritual language tenderly states that Enlil fixed the king's fate. In practice, this meant the priesthood lovingly accepted him. Processions were held, and solemn oaths were sworn in the names of the great gods. Seals from this ancient world depict a seated deity gracefully offering a rod and ring to a human figure. This scene is not random artistry. It is an explanation in miniature. Authority is a measured, sacred thing. It emanates from the divine court and is lovingly bestowed upon a city through its chosen leader. The Anunnaki were imagined as profoundly present beings. Artists carved them with horned crowns, clear signals of their divinity, along with long, flowing beards and robes with intricately patterned hems. A few images hint at an ethereal aura that scholars call melam, a radiant presence so potent it could make one's hair gently rise and knees softly yield. Yet, they were human enough to share a banquet, to listen to counsel, and even to gently frown upon poor manners. This delicate blend of grandeur and familiarity made them wonderfully approachable in ritual. A farmer could pour beer at a small shrine, trusting that the great ones listened, even when engrossed in weighty cosmic matters. People did not worship the Anunnaki as a single, unified entity. There was no grand temple of the Anunnaki with a combined staff and a singular cult statue. Devotion focused on individual gods: Enlil at Nippur, Inanna at Uruk, Enki at Eridu, Nana at Ur, Utu at Sippar, and Lhasa. Each city lovingly served its patron with festivals, food offerings, and music. Yet, the group name held deep significance. In oaths, scribes sometimes invoked the Anunnaki to witness a boundary or a treaty, a way of calling upon the entire divine court as sacred notaries. To break such an oath was not merely to offend one god, it was to subtly insult the senior, revered board. Divination blossomed from this deep-seated belief that decisions were made in the celestial realms above. If the council had already charted the course of events, people yearned for a way to discern that path before it reached them. Mesopotamians cultivated a profound craft for this. Priests would gently pour oil on water, studying the delicate shapes formed by the film. They gazed at the stars, compiling long, meticulous lists that linked celestial signs with earthly occurrences. They studied the livers of sacrificial sheep, reading the subtle marks on the surface as if they were a sacred message. These were not mere parlor tricks. They were earnest, heartfelt endeavors to ask, has the court already spoken? And if so, what did it gently say? The Omen series, which later scholars named Enuma Anu Enlil, beautifully illustrates how systematic this practice became. A soft red glow around the moon might portend one thing for the harvest. A wind from a particular quarter during an eclipse might whisper something else for a military campaign. Scribes recorded all this activity with a care that feels remarkably modern. A tablet might note that on a certain day of a certain month, a priest observed a sign, and that the sign perfectly matched a known entry in an omen list. Another tablet might record a king's vow of a gift to Enlil if he returned safely from a march, and that he faithfully fulfilled this vow on the third day after his return. Foundation deposits, gently buried beneath new walls, included small, precious objects and heartfelt written prayers to the gods, asking them to protect the building and to favor the city that lovingly built it. This practice was both practical and deeply devout, an insurance in the most ancient, spiritual sense. One performed their work with diligence, and then humbly asked the highest court to co-sign it. The council also gently set the rhythm of the ritual year. Each city possessed its own calendar, yet the underlying logic was beautifully shared. New moons marked fresh beginnings. Planting and harvest brought joyful processions into the streets. Lamentations were softly sung in lean times. Joyful hymns ascended when canals filled and fields turned a vibrant green. In later Babylon, the The new year would evolve into a magnificent civic rite, where a king would take the hand of a god and walk through the city. But the tender roots of that profound idea lay in Sumer, where public life and divine favor moved in harmonious step. It is tempting, perhaps, to imagine such a celestial court as eternally calm, untouched by discord. Yet, the ancient stories gently suggest otherwise. While the Anunnaki gracefully agreed upon the fundamental structure of existence, they did not always find harmony in the delicate details. Hymns lovingly praise Enlil as a steadfast ruler who maintains order, but also tenderly acknowledge that his judgments could be severe. Enki, in his wisdom, earned a reputation for seeking a humane path when rigid decrees threatened to cause harm. Inanna, with her vibrant spirit, often pushed against boundaries, coaxing new outcomes when old customs seemed to hinder the flow of change. This was not mere squabbling. It was a profound exploration of how a society delicately balanced its myriad needs. Order held its sacred place. Mercy mattered deeply. Energetic innovation broke stalemates. Two profound aspects of this ancient world help us understand why the council always held such immense significance. Firstly, Mesopotamia itself was inherently a land of gentle uncertainty. Rivers shifted their courses. Years of drought brought hardship. Neighboring cities often cast longing eyes upon each other's fertile fields. A shared, deep-seated belief that destinies were woven in the heavens above provided a much-needed emotional ballast. Secondly, the economy, at its very core, was collective. Irrigation, the lifeblood of their world, demanded a workforce moving in perfect, harmonious step. If leaders could present their decisions as having been confirmed by the Anunnaki, people were more likely to embrace challenging assignments. When the canal roster was unveiled, a foreman could point to the tablet and softly affirm that the gods themselves approved this schedule. Grumble, if you must, he might imply, but bring your baskets, for this is divine will. There was also a more somber hue to this faith. If destinies were indeed fixed, then failure could be perceived as a tragic sign that a preordained fate had turned. A city that fell might compose a poignant lament, whispering that its patron god had, in sorrow, departed the temple. Priests would ritually carry the divine statue away, singing with heavy hearts for its return. These poems remain deeply moving to read even today, speaking of shattered gates, fires in sacred courtyards, and empty streets where joyful singers once walked. The balm for such grief was always the same: rebuild the walls, re-roof the hallowed halls, make heartfelt offerings, invite the council to bless the renewed work. Wait, with patient hope, for the verdict to gently shift. By the later reaches of the second millennium, the idea of a formal, sacred object known as the Tablet of Destinies began to appear in myth. In one tale, a proud being dares to steal it from Enlil's sacred house, and chaos unfurls until the tablet is lovingly recovered. The story beautifully amplifies a simple truth: if you remove the authority that gently fixes outcomes, the world trembles. Restore that authority to its rightful place, and order gracefully resumes. The vision that emerges is beautifully clear. The Anunnaki are not mere flashes of storm and fire. They are the profound architecture beneath all events. Their divine court lovingly shapes a year, a gentle rain, a bountiful harvest, and even the course of war. Their signs are etched in the vast sky and whispered in the liver of a sheep, found in the successful launch of a barge and the safe return of a caravan. Their images wear horns, for rank should be respectfully evident. Their gifts are measured, for power without measure is no power at all. And all of this was as profoundly real to a Sumerian as the soft feel of wet clay and the rhythmic sound of a millstone. The Sumerians did not envision their gods idly seated on high thrones, untouched by the world's needs. Instead, they lovingly set them to work, and then tenderly wove stories about how that sacred labor was accomplished. If one were to gently trace the narratives on their ancient tablets, one would discover a rich tapestry of divine tasks, explaining with profound grace why the world unfolded as it did. The purpose was never to simply dazzle, but to bring a deep sense of understanding to rivers, fields, kingship, justice, and the sometimes bewildering turns of fortune. A beautiful starting point is a composition scholars have named Enki and the World Order. It reads like a gentle journey and a thoughtful elucidation combined. Enki sets forth from his cherished home at Eridu, tenderly assigning responsibilities as he travels. He grants the marshes their watchful keepers and their precious reeds. He appoints guardians for the life-giving Tigris and Euphrates. He names the deities who will lovingly oversee grain, cattle, carpentry, metalwork, and weaving. Mountains receive their serene overseers, and sea coasts are given their gentle custodians. The story, in its very essence, is deeply Sumerian. It treats the cosmos almost as an intricate irrigation system, one that requires wise and capable stewards. Enki acts much like a chief engineer, gifted with a profound talent for harmonizing roles with inherent abilities. For those who grew up in a land where a misplaced canal gauge could bring ruin to an entire year, this vision would surely have been deeply comforting. The beautiful idea that culture itself is a sacred collection of powers entrusted to cities reappears in the poignant tale of the Me. These are the divine ordinances that breathe life into civilization. They encompass music, writing, kingship, truth, skilled trades, and even the practical, sometimes challenging, aspects that life demands, including rivalry and conflict. In one vibrant episode, Inanna journeys to Enki at Eridu and, through her gentle persuasion, convinces him to pour the Me into a boat. She then sails for Uruk with this precious cargo. When Enki awakens and realizes what has transpired, he sends forth creatures to gently stop her, but they fail. Inanna arrives in Uruk with these divine gifts, and the city blossoms with new arts and institutions. It is an origin story that speaks less of thunderous drama and more of the quiet, profound logistics of creation. A goddess lovingly brings home the very toolkit of culture, and her people, in turn, begin their sacred work. Kingship itself yearned for a mythic seal of approval. The Sumerian king list, a humble yet profound text, provides just that. It solemnly claims that kingship descended from heaven, then gracefully traces its path through a sequence of cities and rulers, illustrating how this divine gift moved across time. Before the Great Flood, it rested in Eridu, then Bad Tibira, then Larak, then Sippar, then Shuruppak. After the flood, it gently reappeared at Kish. The list, by modern historical standards, may not be strictly accurate, but it beautifully reveals how people understood the ebb and flow of political change. When a city rose to prominence, it was because the council of the great gods had lovingly bestowed upon it the sacred office. When a city fell, that divine office simply moved on. The Anunnaki do not appear in person within the king list, yet their guiding hand is subtly present in its every logic. Order emanates from above. Authority is borrowed, never truly owned. In long, narrative poetry, the Anunnaki often emerge at the edges of pivotal scenes, their presence carrying immense weight. The most widely known example lies within the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, an ancient survivor recounts a flood that engulfed the world. It was not a random storm, but a solemn decision. The great gods had agreed to silence humankind, whose ceaseless clamor had grown unbearable. The flood descends. The chosen man survives by building a boat, guided by a gentle warning from a friendly god. When the waters recede, he offers a sacrifice. The text tenderly states that the gods gathered like eager flies around the rising smoke, for they had grown hungry without human offerings. This line is vivid and carries a gentle, knowing irony, revealing how Sumerians perceived the profound bond between heaven and earth. People nurture the gods with festivals and altars. The gods, in turn, keep the world in harmonious order. Break this delicate arrangement, and both sides suffer. Justice, too, possessed a divine procedure. Utu, whom Akkadian speakers call Shamash, is the radiant sun and the just judge. He patiently hears petitions and gracefully traverses the sky, observing what people do when they believe no one is watching. In art, he carries a saw-toothed symbol and steps through the horizon gates at dawn, as if entering a sacred court. When an oath is sworn on a canal bank or within a temple courtyard, Utu and the Anunnaki are called upon to witness it. This is more than a mere flourish. It is a profound declaration that a promise binds across multiple realms. The written tablet records it in humble clay. The divine court records it in a place beyond human tampering. From time to time, a story reveals the Anunnaki in a strictly judicial pose. The most striking example is the descent of Inanna. The goddess resolves to visit the realm of the dead, ruled by her sister, Ereshkigal. She passes through 7 gates, and at each gate, she leaves a piece of her sacred regalia. At the deepest point, she is judged by 7 Anunnaki of the underworld. They do not argue. They simply pronounce. Inanna is struck down and hung upon a hook. Only a clever rescue, orchestrated by other gods, brings her back. The message is stark, yet profound. There are rules below, as well as above, and the ancient high gods serve as judges in both realms. That some texts use the name Anunnaki for chthonic judges, while others reserve it for the celestial council, speaks less of contradiction and more of their vast, encompassing range. The same ancient powers lovingly oversee fate in every layer of existence. Temple building is another sacred duty beautifully woven into their stories. Gudea of Lagash left us long, heartfelt inscriptions about the instructions he received in a dream to rebuild the house of Ningirsu. He meticulously describes precise measurements, materials, and rites. He speaks of divine approval for every step, from choosing the clay to setting the door leaves. He calls upon the great gods to bless the work and to dwell within its sacred confines. Read alongside foundation deposits from other cities. A gentle pattern emerges, a ruler presents a bricks-and-mortar project as a humble response to a request from above. The Anunnaki are the ultimate, wise planning board. When they approve, walls rise and endure. There are quieter texts where the gods teach through gentle proverbs. The instructions of Shuruppak offers advice that a father imparts to his son: do not move a boundary stone. Do not neglect the canal bank. Do not mistreat the wife of a soldier. Trust a reliable boatman. These are not thunderous pronouncements, yet they arrive imbued with the authority of the earliest age, when wise kings listened to the will of the gods. The effect is to gently weave divine duty into the very fabric of daily ethics. The Anunnaki do not appear as active characters here, but their unspoken expectations subtly shape the advice. Boundaries hold significance because the gods cherish order, not chaos. Canal banks matter because a breach threatens the common good. The profound idea that the gods assign tasks also shapes military narratives. Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta is a pair of long poems about a ruler of Uruk who seeks exquisite stone and metals from a distant land in the mountains. He invokes Inanna as his cherished patron. He sends a herald with demands and proud declarations. He proposes riddles and spells. At several junctures, the gods gently tip the balance in his favor, not with lightning, but with the precious gift of language. One version whispers that once all people spoke a single tongue, and that the god of wisdom gently changed it. The poems linger at the edge of myth and memory, yet the theme remains familiar. The prosperity of a city depends on whether its patron can persuade the council to grant it what it so deeply needs. Catalogues of offerings add tender detail to these grand themes. We possess lists from Uruk and other cities that meticulously tally what was given to which god on which sacred day: barley, beer, bread, dates, oxen, sheep, birds, fish, perfumes. The quantities are substantial and often precisely noted. Behind these numbers lies a simple, profound premise. An orderly world gently asks its people to uphold their side of the sacred bargain. If one yearns for the Anunnaki to continue decreeing bountiful harvests, victories, and safe returns, one must lovingly keep their celestial kitchens and their music staffed. When trouble gently arrives, one does not accuse. One adds offerings, sings lamentations, and humbly asks the court to reconsider. Divination manuals gracefully complete this picture of divine duty with a candidness that feels almost scientific. Clay models of sheep livers bear delicate labels for zones and marks. Each feature holds an interpretation rooted in long, patient observation and a deep memory of past outcomes. Celestial omens are meticulously logged in the same manner. When Mars appears near a certain star and a wind blows from a particular quarter, scribes diligently note what transpired the last time, and the time before that. This is not magic employed as spectacle. It is a profound habit of record-keeping applied to deep belief. The Anunnaki gently set the line of events. People earnestly strive to read it with honesty. By the later centuries of Mesopotamian religion, new epics would lovingly place younger gods at the heart of creation stories, and the ancient council would be envisioned as a vast assembly, counted by the hundreds. These later developments do not, however, erase the older, profound pattern. In Sumer, the Anunnaki remain the revered elders who gently organize the world and continue to serve as the sacred court of record. They assign the me. They approve rulers. They bless, or sometimes withdraw blessing from, cities. They judge in life, and they judge in death. Their work is not one of fleeting fireworks. It is administration on the grandest, most sacred scale. All of this, in its vastness, leads to the most consequential task the gods ever lovingly undertook. Translations of Gilgamesh gently found their way to general readers, allowing teachers to gaze upon a humble clay tablet and softly utter, "Here, a scribe pressed a mark 4,000 years ago," conveying a meaning we can still lovingly decipher. The vast expanse between a modern soul and a Sumerian artifact seemed to diminish on days when a translation beautifully captured a fleeting joke or a lingering sigh. A timeless hymn might tenderly praise a deity for blessing parched fields with fresh water, and a visitor who had nurtured a garden with a hose in the summer heat would feel a profound resonance, a quiet understanding. The path of this rediscovery was not a smooth ascent. It was marked by tender struggles. Wars tragically interrupted field work. Precious collections were scattered or delicately damaged, and ancient sites slowly eroded while permits were patiently debated. Yet, the story, in its quiet determination, continued to unfold, for the very sources themselves were stubbornly resilient. Clay, though fragile, preserves writing with a grace that papyrus or leather could not match. A city consumed by fire might, in its demise, leave behind a library of baked, enduring knowledge. A fallen wall could tenderly seal rooms, holding their secrets safe for future hands to gently open. With each passing season that dedicated teams returned to the hallowed ground, another collection of tablets emerged, waiting to be read and catalogued. Every new beginning felt like a cherished conversation lovingly resumed. As the century drew to a close, a reader stepping into a well-appointed library could discover entire series lovingly dedicated to Mesopotamian religion and mythology. There were thoughtful bilingual editions, placing transliteration on one page and its translation on the next, inviting contemplation. Dictionaries offered pathways to untangle the intricate Sumerian compounds and the ancient Akkadian verb stems. Atlases carefully traced the shifting courses of those life-giving rivers. Within the pages of these books, the Anunnaki stood where they truly belonged, not as mere curiosities, but as a profound core idea in how the people of the first cities gently organized their understanding of the unseen. The long, deep silence had finally ended, blossoming into a chorus of small, echoing voices etched in clay. They spoke of a world where gods and people delicately negotiated work and fate, where a revered council thoughtfully set rules, where old titles gathered new, evolving duties, and where an ancient word for a royal family lovingly transformed into a term for the highest court in every realm. The Anunnaki had been lost, their memory veiled, and then they were tenderly found, not just as ethereal legends, but as tangible lines, seals, and bricks that one could hold, feeling the weight of ages in one's hand. Once these precious tablets began to whisper in modern languages, most readers found contentment in marveling at the poetry, the subtle legal wit, and the enduring practicality of the first cities. However, a few readers yearned for something more explosive, a deeper tremor. They gazed upon gods who descended from the sky and pondered if sky truly held the meaning they instinctively grasped. And so, the Anunnaki gently drifted from the quiet seminar rooms into the vibrant glow of late-night television and the brighter, more imaginative corners of popular culture. The initial significant surge came from writers who delighted in questioning whether ancient monuments might have required assistance from beyond our world. In the 1960 seconds, a Swiss hotelier named Erich von Däniken filled countless pages with evocative photos and intriguing questions. Did ancient stones quietly reveal images of rockets? Did old myths tenderly describe intricate machines? He journeyed from the sun-drenched landscapes of Peru to the timeless sands of Egypt and back to the cradle of Mesopotamia, pointing and softly asking. His book sold in remarkable numbers, perhaps because the idea was so deeply flattering. If our ancestors conversed with visitors from the stars, then we, the moderns, are part of a grand, cosmic fellowship. While little of it withstood rigorous scrutiny, the human yearning for wonder was profoundly real. The leap that placed the Anunnaki at the very heart of this narrative came next. In the 1970 seconds, Zecharia Sitchin published a book with a truly audacious claim. He proposed that the Sumerians did not merely spin myths. They meticulously recorded history from a time when a wandering planet gracefully swept near Earth on a long, cold orbit. He called this celestial body Nibiru, and its inhabitants, he declared, were the Anunnaki. They came, he suggested, in search of gold to mend their ailing atmosphere. Discovering early humans, they perceived a profound potential. Enki, reimagined as a scientist with the Earth's wet clay upon his hands, gently devised a way to blend divine blood with the essence of a clever primate. The wondrous result, he claimed, was us. He insisted the tablets unveiled all of this, for those readers who possessed the insight to truly see. It was a magnificent story, resonating with the language of planets and genes, making it feel akin to science. It also touched upon theology, bestowing purpose upon creation and a role upon gods who now possessed star charts. And, with a hint of mystery, it felt a little like a detective tale, implying that only a select few could truly decipher its hidden clues. Millions of readers embraced this idea, and more books gently followed. A generation later, television producers discovered a format that brought these claims vividly to life. A camera could gracefully sweep across a ziggurat, while a narrator's voice softly spoke of visitors who bestowed the gifts of writing and lore. The word Anunnaki became a whispered password, a silent announcement that one was privy to an enormous, ancient secret. Yet, a second, quieter path unfolded alongside this grand spectacle. Scholars gently raised their hands, asking for a return to the sanctity of the tablets themselves. They thoughtfully pointed out that Nibiru, in the later astronomical texts, was a title that could mark a planet like Jupiter or denote a celestial crossing place, not a hidden world. They tenderly showed that Anunnaki in the earlier myths referred to the high circle of gods, not to travelers from the cold expanse of space. They noted that creation from clay mingled with divine blood was a ritual explanation for humanity's ability to converse with the gods, not a laboratory record. They also gently reminded readers that orbits faithfully obey mathematical laws, and a large, hidden world gracefully swinging through our system, every few millennia, would have subtly tugged at the other planets in ways we would have long since measured. The divide between these two perspectives deepened when dates became intertwined with prophecy. As the year 2012 softly approached, some predicted the return of the wandering world, that ancient gods would once again stand upon their platforms, or, at the very least, that the sky would behave erratically. Astronomers, with the gentle patience of schoolteachers, offered interviews. There is no rogue planet, they calmly stated. If there were, amateurs with even small telescopes would have photographed it years in advance. The year gently passed, bringing its usual share of storms and elections. The old tablets remained peacefully in their cases. The very fact that these ideas persistently returned speaks something kind and tender about us. People yearn for meaning on a grand, sweeping scale, and the Mesopotamians, too, felt this profound desire. They found it in a sacred council that set destinies, in a solemn contract between gods and cities, and in a map where every gate had a watchful guardian. Modern readers, sometimes feeling a gentle dissatisfaction with the slow, patient work of humanity, occasionally seek a faster, more explosive spark. Aliens, in this yearning, become a tender substitute for divine will. Rockets stand in for ancient thrones. The Anunnaki fit effortlessly into this frame, for they already carry the profound weight of origin stories. There is a third, more contemplative path through this modern maze. It resides gracefully between mere debunking and unquestioning belief. This path treats the ancient texts as deeply human documents, inviting us to read them with tender care, allowing for wonder without ever surrendering to pure fantasy. Along this gentle path, the flood story whispers to us of a land that lived intimately with rivers, experiencing them as both a precious gift and a looming threat. The creation of people to carry baskets speaks an honest truth about societies built upon organized labor. The descent to the underworld tenderly illustrates how grief is given structure, how the departed must be kept close through names and heartfelt offerings. The Anunnaki, on this path, are not spacemen. They are the profound way a city made sense of power, justice, and its inherent limits. This understanding does not, and perhaps should not, halt the delightful borrowings of pop culture. Fiction thrives on the gentle what if. A novelist who places an Anunnaki on a lonely shore, bestowing upon him a memory of distant stars, writes in the same tender spirit that allowed a Sumerian to sing of a moon god gracefully riding a boat across the night sky. What truly matters is that we discern which shelf we are on. Myth can be playful and still remain deeply true to its source. Pseudoscience, however, often pretends to be a manual, then subtly asks to be judged on its charm alone. One persistent, lingering question deserves a gentle answer, for it has, perhaps, generated more heat than genuine illumination. Some writers have tenderly linked the Anunnaki with biblical hints about sons of God and giants. It is effortlessly easy to draw threads across texts if one relies solely on the sound of words. The careful, more loving way is to diligently follow the languages and the dates. Ideas do indeed travel. Flood stories, without a doubt, did. But Mesopotamian gods are not simply rebadged figures in later sacred books. They possess their own rich history, dwelling in a very specific world of canals, barley, and baked brick. Their stories do not require a later scaffolding to stand tall and proud. If you gently return to the tablets after a tour through the modern claims, they feel steadier, more profoundly rooted than ever. A scribe in an old Babylonian schoolroom meticulously writes that people were created so that the gods would not have to labor. A Sumerian hymn lovingly praises Enlil for setting destinies. A list of offerings quietly states that 50 loaves and 10 jugs of beer were given to the high circle at the new moon. A boundary stone tenderly calls upon the Anunnaki to punish a land thief. None of these lines require a spaceship to make sense. They require a city where everyone understood that work must be lovingly shared and that promises must steadfastly hold. The more deeply you read, the more these modern detours appear as a gentle mirror, reflecting our current hopes and fears. A fear that our knowledge is not enough, a hope that we are part of a wider, more magnificent story. These are fair, deeply human feelings, and the ancients, too, harbored them. They responded with temples, calendars, and councils. We respond with telescopes, particle accelerators, and sometimes with mass-market paperbacks that quickly leave the shelf. In both instances, the craving is the same. We yearn to see the frame, to understand the larger picture. There is no harm in gently enjoying a television hour where someone points at a relief and softly says, "Perhaps." There is harm, however, when speculation is presented and sold as translation. The best corrective is not scolding. It is the quiet, profound act of reading. Read an account tablet that lists the humble rations for a canal crew, and then read the tender lines in Atrahasis, where the gods decide that people will carry baskets. Read the lament for a fallen city and stand before a burned bricklayer in an excavation trench, feeling its silent story. Read a hymn to Inanna and walk the ancient plan of Uruk where her temple once stood. The old stories, in their gentle power, will earn your trust without any external help. In the end, the modern life of the Anunnaki has branched into two distinct paths. In one, they are the thoughtful managers of a universe that gracefully operates on decrees, offerings, and measured time. In the other, they are travelers from a distant world, leaving us a mixed inheritance of freedom and servitude. The first branch is lovingly backed by clay and context, the second by wish and rhetoric. Both are now interwoven into our cultural memory. Yet, only one truly requires a glossary to be understood. The word Anunnaki was once a scholar's quiet term, living mostly in the hushed footnotes and seminar rooms. Then, something profound shifted. A minor caste of ancient deities stepped onto the bright, vibrant stage of modern culture, finding themselves playing every conceivable role, from cosmic mentor to secret overlord. This transformation did not happen in a single season. It was a steady, gentle drift, powered by television, paperbacks, message boards, and the simple, enduring fact that old stories travel beautifully when given a fresh, captivating vehicle. The first destination was television, which tantalizingly promised revelations after every commercial break. Producers quickly learned that a camera adores ruins, especially when gracefully flown past at sunset with a dramatic drumbeat added. A narrator could softly whisper that the stones held a secret, then reveal a tablet covered in ancient wedge marks. Scholars had patiently explained for years that these marks recorded hymns, laws, and daily accounts. The new programs, however, gently asked if they also recorded visitors from the sky. This question became the captivating hook. One didn't need an answer to feel its powerful lure. Episodes multiplied, and cities like Uruk and Ur became recurring, familiar characters. Ziggurats stood tall, reimagined as launch towers. The word Anunnaki acquired a sparkle it had never worn when it was merely a line in a hymn. Publishers kept pace, releasing large paperbacks with glossy inserts that promised a key to the oldest mysteries. Dust jackets featured reliefs of kings with wings, cylinder seals enlarged to billboard size, and starfields gently drifting behind the title. Within these pages, the Anunnaki could be wise teachers, stern geneticists, or a dynasty that had never truly departed. Chapters beautifully blended real photographs with captions that subtly suggested new meanings. The method was elegantly simple. Take a known object, add a provocative gloss, and gently allow the reader to fill in the rest. Museums experienced a ripple effect. Visitors arrived with questions that gracefully leaped across millennia in a single breath. A guide might begin with the irrigation of the lower rivers, before the group had reached the second display case, find themselves in a delicate debate about a wandering world beyond Neptune. The Internet, with its boundless reach, opened 1,000 side doors. Early forums hosted long, winding threads where people exchanged translations, drawings, and dreams. Amateur archivists scanned old articles and posted them with thoughtful comments. Someone would quote a line from a tablet. Someone else would link to a satellite image of a mound in Iraq and softly inquire what lay beneath. Videos gracefully stitched together stock footage and began with the evocative words, "What if?" A subculture of explainers emerged, the kind of people who could speak for an hour with an earnest calm that almost convinced. The Anunnaki became a cherished password in these digital spaces. Using it signaled a willingness to entertain very grand stories about human origins and destinies. Games and fiction gently joined in. Writers adore a ready-made pantheon. The name Anunnaki sounds ancient and rich, even if one cannot quite place it on a map. Game designers borrowed the mood. A role-playing rulebook might list the Anunnaki as an ancient faction whose relics bestowed strange, wondrous powers. A science fiction novel might place a hidden base beneath a desert ziggurat, imagining a signal that awakens after a long, quiet dormancy. Comic artists lovingly drew tall figures with horned crowns stepping from a shaft of light, while human onlookers shielded their eyes in awe. None of this claimed to be history. It was the kind of playful invention that myth invites when it leaves the classroom. Music and art took their turn. A band named an album for a Skyfather. A lyricist wove a flood and a lost city into a chorus that crowds could chant with fervor. Tattoo artists learned to translate a favorite cuneiform sign into clean, elegant lines. Street murals depicted a winged figure on a brick wall beside a spray-painted planet, as if to whisper that the most ancient stories still yearn to speak in modern weather. Pop culture is a gentle net that catches what glimmers. The Anunnaki began to glimmer. Conventions transformed the movement into a social gathering. In hotel ballrooms and community centers, speakers took the stage with slides that gracefully transitioned from archaeological excavations to intricate star charts. In the lobby, vendors sold paperbacks, replica seals, and meteorite fragments the size of a thumbnail. In one quiet corner, a retired engineer patiently explained to a teenager how a reed boat might behave on a sudden flood. In another, a podcaster recorded interviews about a possible return date for an object no observatory had ever tracked. The gathering was part science fair, part spiritual revival, and part book club. Most people came for the sheer thrill of an idea that gently linked the first cities to the far future. Museums, in their wisdom, adapted. Curators learned to anticipate questions that were not in the wall text. They thoughtfully wrote labels that explained how a scribe held a reed and why a tablet broke the way it did. They added a panel that clarified what Nibiru means in the late star lists and why scholars do not use it to denote a hidden planet. Docents practiced clear, gentle answers that respected curiosity, while tenderly guiding visitors back to the evidence held within the display case. Some exhibitions even staged a gentle debate by placing a tablet describing the flood beside a map of ancient river channels and a photograph of a modern levee. The profound effect was to show that myth, environment, and memory form a beautiful, intricate braid rather than a perplexing riddle box. Schools, too, felt the gentle ripple. Teachers discovered that a lesson on Mesopotamia drew more attention when it acknowledged the pop culture version, then used that burgeoning interest to teach how we truly know what we know. A class might read a short passage from Atrahasis and then attempt to design a simple boat from reeds and paper to carry a handful of grain across a tub. On another day, they might examine a boundary stone and then lovingly write a modern contract that borrowed its ancient language. The word Anunnaki thus became a doorway to the real, daily world of barley, brick, and debt. The wildest corners of the web offered other performances. Some transformed the Anunnaki into a set of masked rulers, subtly pulling strings behind elections and bank ledgers. Others fused them with saints, demons, or hidden bloodlines. The pattern is familiar. Take a term that carries the weight of age and authority, detach it from its sacred context, and allow it to absorb whatever a moment fears or craves. In this mode, the Anunnaki become a mirror, reflecting modern suspicion. When institutions gently disappoint, a story about unseen hands can feel like an answer, even if it leaves one more anxious than before. Meanwhile, a quieter current has steadily grown. Independent translators lovingly post side-by-side renderings of short hymns. Digital projects build searchable corpora that allow anyone to look up a word in a line from a tablet and see every other place it gracefully occurs. Documentary filmmakers spend time with archaeologists in the field, tenderly showing how a single square meter of soil can yield 3 tablets that subtly change how we date a local ruler. In these works, the Anunnaki return to their original, cherished roles as a label for the highest council and, later, for the judges below. The drama is still present, but it now belongs to a living discipline that can gently discern when a claim truly fits the clay and when it does not. If there is a reason the Anunnaki have found a permanent, enduring niche in popular culture, it is that they answer 2 profound appetites at once. They offer the romance of the first cities, with their grand processions, towering structures, and glittering offerings. They also offer a cosmic script that can be rewritten to suit any taste. You can cast them as gentle guardians or as stern tyrants, as wise teachers or as relentless creditors. Their very flexibility is what carried the term through ancient centuries, as their duties gracefully shifted from the sky to the underworld. The same flexibility carries the term through modern media, as it moves from a quiet footnote to a bold headline and back again. The risk, of course, is confusion. But there is also a gentle gain. People who would never have pondered Sumer now look up cuneiform and learn the tender difference between Sumerian and Akkadian. A viewer who arrives for a grand story about lost knowledge may linger long enough to learn why a calendar matters deeply to a farmer, how a canal roster was kept fair, and what it truly meant to swear by the names of the old High Court. If the cost is that a museum guard has to smile through one more question about a hidden planet, that seems a price well worth paying for the awakening of wonder. The path from obscurity to spotlight has bestowed upon the Anunnaki a double life. They are still the revered elders who set destinies in tablets and who sit in solemn judgment below. They are also symbols that modern creators lovingly use to signal depth and mystery. The first is anchored in the enduring clay and brick, and the long, flowing memory of a riverland. The second floats in a shimmering sea of screens. Both will likely remain, for the old stories are generous hosts, and modern culture never ceases its search for a stage. If you wish to witness how a modern society gently grapples with ancient stories, visit 3 places in a single afternoon. Begin in a university seminar room, where a professor of Assyriology patiently writes wedge signs on a whiteboard and explains how a single mark can subtly change meaning when turned a quarter turn. Walk next to a planetarium where an astronomer reveals a sky full of tracked objects and explains why wandering worlds reveal themselves long before their arrival. Finish in a museum conservation lab where a specialist in broken clay coaxes a new, delicate line out of a tablet with a brush and a soft light. Between these rooms, you will observe a myth pass through scrutiny, not to flatten its essence, but to find its proper, tender size. Academic skepticism gently begins with language. Ancient words are not puzzles to be solved once and for all. They are living, breathing items that change context by era and by city. Take Nibiru in late Babylonian star lists. It can name a crossing point in the sky or a planet that serves as a marker for seasonal order. It is not a separate world attempting to hide behind the sun. The word Anunnaki behaves in the same delicate way. In Sumerian hymns, it names the high circle of gods who set destinies. In first millennium incantations, it can name the judges below. Neither usage points to a population of miners from deep space. These facts are not mere opinions. They are the tender product of thousands of tablets read in sequence, with a gentle habit of asking what a term means in a given text, rather than what it might mean in an argument. Philology possesses a plain, quiet grace. A scholar lays out parallel passages and shows that a phrase about mixing clay with a god's blood recurs in contexts that discuss cultic birth and the precious gift of speech. The point is not to sneer at imaginative readings. It is to show that ancient authors wrote within traditions that we can lovingly trace. A line that sits beside a hymn in one tablet and a ritual in another does not suddenly become a lab note when moved to a coffee table book. Good skepticism is a careful, tender loyalty to sources. Archaeology adds solid ground beneath the words. Excavations at cities like Uruk, Nippur, and Babylon gently reveal layers of rebuilding. shifts in river courses, and rooms filled with the everyday kit of life. Foundation deposits under new walls carry prayers that humbly ask the old high court to guard the work. Boundary stones summon the same court to curse anyone who moves a marker. The physical record tenderly explains why the gods are so often asked to watch over canals and enforce property. It does not hide a hangar or a landing pad. If someone wished to argue for ships in a marsh, the least they could do is show a bolt or a shard of an alloy the region did not know. None has appeared. Astronomy gently closes the gate on the grandest of modern claims. The solar system is a neighborhood that has been surveyed by dedicated professionals and by hobbyists who do not mind losing sleep. Large celestial bodies announce themselves. They gently tug on planets we already track. They glow in infrared surveys. Their paths can be simulated on a laptop and compared to what we see through glass. When people predict that a hidden giant will swoop near the Earth, astronomers do not scoff. They measure. When the measurement returns empty, they calmly say so. The wonder of the real sky does not suffer for lack of drama. It offers comets that shed tails like chalk and planets with moons that eclipse in patterns so crisp you can set a clock to them. Scientists and scholars also keep a gentle eye on the ways ideas spread. Claims about a dangerous object with no coordinates often follow a pattern. The date shifts when the day passes, and the evidence is always one layer removed. The believer says a friend knows someone who worked at a facility that saw something that cannot be shown. In such cases, the calm reply is to invite a look through a telescope, a visit to a public sky survey, and a review of how orbits gently work. A general audience can learn the essentials of celestial mechanics faster than one might think. Once you understand why a long-period giant would have battered the inner system for eons, you stop expecting it to tiptoe past in a single season. None of this implies that those old stories are small or insignificant. The flood tale is not a mere weather report, but it is a poignant way to remember the truth of living in a delta where a river can shift and drown a generation. The creation of people to carry baskets is not a laboratory scene, but it is as honest about labor and rations as any modern budget. The descent to the underworld does not draw a map, but it gives tender shape to grief and explains why families lovingly poured beer for their dead when the month turned. A myth holds profound wisdom when it remains where it truly belongs. You can discern the health of a field in how it treats disagreement. Assyriology is surprisingly cheerful about debate. Editors publish new collations that gently correct old readings. A tablet that once seemed to convey one meaning reveals another when a lost corner tenderly resurfaces. Arguments unfold in footnotes with a dry humor that hides a deep, real passion for getting a line precisely right. Even the larger conclusions gracefully adjust over time. A century ago, scholars wrote about fixed pantheons. Today, they speak of divine households that subtly shift by city and by period, offering a richer, more nuanced view of why a name like Anunnaki can travel from the sky to the deep. There is also a lesson in humility that emanates directly from the tablets themselves. Clay is fragile, yet it outlives empires. A temple burns, and the intense heat bakes a library into enduring durability. A flood knocks down a wall and seals a storeroom where a clerk last stacked a set of loans. When we read what he wrote, we are not only learning about gods, we are witnessing how human beings, in a challenging place, crafted systems that bravely lasted. Scribes invented a way to number time that still gently governs our days. Surveyors set boundary marks that endured through dynasties. Priests created calendars that moved crowds in harmonious step. These achievements stand tall, whether or not anyone ever looked down from another world. The legacy of the Anunnaki in modern life is, therefore, a double thread. On one strand, the name is a gentle teaching tool, leading students toward the first cities, the first ledgers, and the first grand attempts to put justice into writing. On the other, the name has become a canvas for new stories that speak tenderly about our own anxieties and wishes. Both strands will continue. One remains anchored to clay and careful reading. The other floats and changes color with each passing decade. It may be that the endurance of the old term depends on that very flexibility. A living culture gracefully finds uses for an ancient label, even when the original owners might not recognize the part it plays. What truly matters is that we keep the category straight. When a museum label tells you that a tablet is a hymn to Enlil, recorded in Sumerian and copied in Akkadian, that is a piece of knowledge hard-won and precious. When a late-night host tells you that the same hymn is a veiled description of a machine, that is theater. Enjoy the show, but do not place it in a footnote. The ancient authors deserve that tender respect. They built a world in words that explained why cities rise and fall, why work must be shared, and why promises bind. They named a high council that fixed destinies, and they later pictured that council as a bench of judges below. That is quite enough grandeur for one tradition. If you desire a final test of how myth and science can coexist without quarrel, return to the planetarium after dark. A guide gently dims the lights and brings up the sky of a spring night over the lower rivers. 4,000 years ago. The constellations appear both strange and tenderly familiar. The moon rises. A delicate line appears, marking the path of Jupiter as it would have moved that month. The guide quotes an omen that links the bright god to a good harvest if a wind blows from a given quarter. Then the guide explains how the planet gracefully loops against the background stars because of the intricate dance of our orbits. No one in the room feels cheated. The old line and the new explanation sit together as neatly as an offering bowl inside a brick shrine. The Anunnaki keep their cherished seat in memory. The sky keeps its inherent beauty. We keep our profound appetite for both. Walk into a quiet room with a single clay tablet resting on its stand, and you can feel the distance between us and the first cities gently shrink to nothing. The marks are small and tidy, a list of offerings, a hymn, a king's boast. Somewhere behind it stands a priest who counted loaves at dawn, or a scribe who copied a line until it sounded just right. Out of this plain material, the people of the lower rivers built a map of the unseen that they called the work of the Anunnaki. It explained why days had shape and why rulers needed limits. It softly said that destinies were spoken in a court that stood above human quarrels. It was a practical spirituality, and it proved enduringly durable. The old stories are not random legends stacked one upon another. They are a joined, intricate system. The separation of sky and earth gives the world its profound structure. The council of the high gods sets fates so that kingship and the calendar possess weight. The creation of people answers a labor problem and justifies a social order where canal rosters and temple rations truly matter. The flood resets the delicate balance when growth outruns the land's patience. then leaves a tender promise that life will continue within a narrower span. The descent to the realm of the dead teaches that grief can be managed if the living remember the names of their own. Each episode gently solves a problem that a city faces and transforms it into a story that can be repeated at festivals and read in quiet, contemplative rooms. When we speak of mythology, we sometimes imply a cloud of fancy. In Mesopotamia, it was also a profound handbook. The me are not mere ornaments in a poem. They are a catalogue of powers that make a city work, from plows and weaving to truth and kingship. The Anunnaki are not a parade of caprice. They are a council that lovingly guarantees that decisions echo across years, not just days. Even the grandest moments carry a Clark sense of what must be tallied. When Inanna carries culture home by boat, she returns with real institutions. When a boundary stone calls on the high court to curse a thief, it is enforcing a fence line that keeps a harvest safe. This clarity is why Mesopotamian myth traveled so well. Traders carried it upriver. Conquerors repackaged it for their own capitals. Scribes adapted the caste as duties shifted. The Hittites borrowed the idea of elder gods confined below by a younger order. The Babylonians promoted a city god to chief and gave him the task of setting the sky in measurable paths. The Hebrews, who lived within reach of the same rivers, shaped a flood story that kept the bones of an older tale and placed it in a new frame of one god and a covenant. Motifs crossed languages with the ease of a caravan on a good road because the needs they met were the same. Every society must ponder work and authority, catastrophe and loss. A modern reader can move between these retellings and witness a new thing gently unfold. Myth becomes a way to compare how cultures answer the same profound question in different rooms. Why does power belong to some and not to others? Sumer whispers that the office descends from heaven and is ratified in a sacred city. Babylon suggests that a god who rebuilds the world earns the right to rule the rest. Israel tenderly says that a single creator binds kings to justice and remembers the poor. The argument is centuries long and entirely civil on the page. Each tradition hands down a set of stories and expects citizens to live with the gentle consequences. There is a pleasure in how concrete the Mesopotamian system remains, even at its most cosmic. Ziggurats are not abstract ladders. They are bricks that lift a ritual to a height where a procession can be seen across a city. A calendar is not a metaphysical diagram. It is a schedule for canals, sowing, and harvest that people chant so everyone shows up on time. Omens do not turn people into puppets. They turn attention outward to sky and wind so that decisions are made with tender care. The Anunnaki sit above, but they never float away from streets where millstones turn and barges gently nose through a narrow lock. If you ask what gives these myths their staying power, the answer is that they keep their feet firmly on the ground while their eyes are lovingly on the horizon. They admit that the world is perilous and that the best one can do is share burdens and keep promises in the sight of witnesses who will outlast you. They give a name to fate but leave room for argument and mercy in the figure of a god who seeks humane paths when rules chafe. They praise order, but do not pretend that order is free. Someone must clean the silt from a canal. Someone must sing a lament when a city falls. The stories do not excuse those tasks. They honor them. They also acknowledge limits without despair. Mortality arrives after the flood, not as a curse alone, but as a boundary that makes society bearable. The afterlife is no prize, yet the living can comfort the dead with regular, loving attention. Kings may boast, but every tablet that records a grant also calls on the highest court to punish future fraud, which is a quiet confession that power needs checks and balances. A tradition that says such things is not just old, it is mature. When the Anunnaki step into the modern imagination as aliens or secret patrons, we are witnessing a familiar human move. We take an elder symbol for order and fit it to fresh anxieties. Sometimes that is playful and generous. Sometimes it is a shortcut that mistakes wonder for evidence. Either way, the term endures because it remains a useful vessel for awe. A writer can place it in a sentence, and readers will sense that something large is at stake, even if they cannot quite articulate why. The better use is to let the old idea do the job it was built for. Treat Anunnaki as the name for the High Council in a world that believed the universe gently runs on rules that cities must honor. Read a hymn to Enlil, and then look at the plan of Nippur where petitions were brought. Read the flood story, and then look at the silt band in a trench at Shurapak. Read a boundary curse, and then walk along a modern levee, feeling in your body why a line matters. The myths are not there to escape reality. They are there to bind reality together with clear language and shared memory. There is one last way in which these stories are profoundly modern. They encourage a habit of transparency. Decisions must be spoken in public. Oaths must name witnesses, both divine and human. Rituals should be regular and visible. You could almost say that the invention of accountability begins here, in the insistence that a fate is not a whim, but a decree that can be heard and weighed. When later cultures adopt written law and public festival, they are building on ground that the first cities stamped with wedges. So when you stand in that quiet room, and the tablet on the stand still looks small, remember what it tenderly contains: a belief that time is countable, a conviction that work is a shared trust, a fear of flood and famine offset by a stubborn faith that order can return if cities rebuild and gods forgive, and a name for a council that guarantees that words have weight. The Anunnaki survive not because they are glamorous, but because the world still needs what they represent. If you gently strip the gold from the funerary masks, roll up the painted wall reliefs, and set aside the grand names, what remains is a set of worries and hopes that look profoundly familiar. Rain in season, children who live, work that counts, a fair hearing when trouble comes. The Anunnaki myth cycle is a long, tender conversation about those very things. It is a deeply human story that tried to make the unpredictable seem bearable and the ordinary feel worthy of ceremony. Start with work. The earliest poems never pretend that labor is noble because it is easy. They say directly that irrigation is hard and that someone must carry baskets. They then give that burden a profound frame. If people were made to take up the tasks that gods could not stomach forever, then toil is not a failure of planning. It is a founding choice that sounds stern until you see the comfort it tenderly offers. The farmer on a levee at noon can imagine himself inside a plan that begins before memory. The temple ration list is not only bookkeeping, it is participation in the same compact that the first gods sealed with clay and blood. Meaning arrives in a bowl of beer, counted out by a clerk who knows your name. Move to law. The habit of swearing oaths by the High Court makes justice more than whim. When a scribe writes a boundary grant and calls the Anunnaki to witness, he is trying to tie a local quarrel to the oldest authority in the world. He is also tenderly protecting future strangers. A tablet buried under a marker stone speaks for anyone who is not yet born, so that a field remains a field when memories have thinned. This is a small miracle of foresight. It is the beginning of a tradition that says the dead and the unborn both have claims that the living must respect. Consider grief. The Mesopotamian afterlife is dim and spare. Yet the living refuse to let it be lonely. They pour beer for their dead, bring bread, and speak names aloud so that the shades will feel remembered. The Anunnaki, as judges below, are not only frightening, they are a guarantee that stories do not end in a ditch. A life is weighed, a wrong can still be marked, and a right can still count. When a family keeps the month right, they are not trying to buy favor. They are insisting that connection endures across the river. In a world without antibiotics or rescue helicopters, that insistence is a humane triumph. Think about power. Kings march through the texts with more ceremony than most of us can stomach. But beneath the parade sits a rule that cuts them down to size. Kingship is loaned. It descends. It can be revoked. If a ruler fails, poets will say that the city god walked out of the temple, which is a polite way of saying that legitimacy has left the building. The Anunnaki, in their bright court, are the board that can say, enough. You can call this mythology, but you can also call it the birth of constitutional thought, written in clay instead of parchment. Now watch how the stories gently train attention. Omens lead people to look up and outward, not to freeze in fear, but to gather more information before acting. A moon ring and a wind from the west mean that it is not a good week to pick a fight in the hills. An odd birth in a cow herd warns of strain in the year ahead, so strengthen the canal banks. Today, we call this risk management. The Anunnaki frame turns habit into policy by claiming that the universe sends consistent signals and that careful people can read them. The method is often wrong by modern standards, but the posture is admirable. It says that decisions should be informed, not impulsive. We can also see a steady tenderness for craft. Enki is the patron of clever hands. Ninhursag is the patron of life that is well made. The Mi include weaving, carpentry, music, and brewing. These are not frills. They are ranked with truth and victory because they keep a city alive and make it worth living in. A boat builder who knows how to caulk a seam is an agent of divine order. A singer who remembers the right lament keeps a community honest about loss. When the Anunnaki bless a project, they are blessing skills as much as outcomes. There is a lesson about limits that feels bracing rather than bleak. After the flood, the span of human life is shortened, not to punish, but to prevent the world from choking on success. This is ecological thinking before the word existed. The council chooses a ceiling so that the system can persist. Modern readers hear an echo of ration books and water tables. The ancients heard a boundary that restored sleep to gods and rest to the earth. Either way, the idea is the same. Enough is a virtue. Too much can break the very thing you love. The myths also refuse to make virtue simple. Enlil stands for authority and sometimes swings too hard. Enki stands for mercy, and sometimes bends rules to save lives. Inanna stands for desire and ambition, which can build cities and start wars. Utu stands for justice and is asked to read hearts as well as tablets. These portraits are unflinching. No god is a cartoon. No impulse is pure. A reader learns to value balance and to mistrust any single quality that claims to rule alone. Bring the camera closer, and you can see daily scenes that the stories sanctify without fuss. A brewer skims foam in a courtyard and tips the first cup on the ground for the god. A canal crew breaks in the shade to eat dates and flatbread, then returns to lift baskets in a chain that runs like a drumbeat. A shepherd calls his flock from a levee as a scribe waits with a stylus to tally the count. A midwife dips a cloth in cool water, while a family murmurs a hymn to the mother of all living. When the High Council blesses the city, it is these tasks that grow easier for a season. Myth gives them a frame and a thank you. Even war is brought within rules. Before a campaign, kings consult omens and priests. They make offerings and swear that they will spare certain sanctuaries. When the season ends, they hang up weapons and mark a festival that mends civic life. The Anunnaki do not ban violence. They domesticate it. They require that power answer to expectation. If that sounds naive, remember how many modern states still need rituals to shepherd troops home and to knit a city back together after strain. The human story also includes a taste for second chances. The flood ends with regret and a new plan rather than a boast. Inanna returns from the underworld through a negotiated substitution that keeps the rules while letting life resume. Even curses on boundary stones include a line that says the gods will bless anyone who restores what was broken. Mercy threads through the hard talk because people cannot live on law alone. It is easy to think that belief in a council of gods belongs to a distant past. Then you notice how much of our life still echoes the older pattern. Companies and courts sit in rooms and decree outcomes that shape years for thousands. We build calendars that tell us when to plant, when to pay, when to gather, and when to rest. We keep ledgers and expect strangers to honor them. We pour drinks for absent friends and speak names at graves. We hope that someone beyond the room keeps a record of what was fair and what was mean. The labels have changed. The habits have not. What the Anunnaki offer in the end is not a set of exotic images, but a way to match human scale to cosmic scale. They make it possible to say that a loaf offered in a side chapel and the path of Jupiter across the month both belong to the same order. They make it possible to believe that a law carved in stone and a prayer whispered at night both carry weight because both are answered in places that outlast any one life. That belief steadied people who lived with fickle rivers and capricious kings. It can steady us as well if we translate the terms with care. So the human story behind the Anunnaki is not really about gods. It is about the profound choice to live as if words matter, as if work is holy when shared, as if limits are a gift, and as if memory binds the living and the dead. The first cities pinned those choices to clay. The tablets are small, but they keep speaking. If you want to test whether the Anunnaki are only words, take a map and go where their names first made sense. The story lives in places. It breathes in the shape of riverbeds and the smell of baked brick after rain. A myth that began in temples still has addresses. Start at Eridu, far to the south, where the ancient shoreline once gently lapped against low ground. Here, the Sumerians said Enki kept house at the meeting of sweet water and salt. Archaeologists found a stack of temples, one built over another, like chapters placed on a shelf. Each layer carried an altar and a plan that grew a little more ambitious than the one beneath it. Stand there and you understand why a god of wisdom would live at a margin between worlds. The sound of reeds in a breeze is a quiet lesson in beginnings. Move north to where the ziggurat rises from the plain with the stubborn pride of a survivor. Woolley cleared its stairways and found the royal cemetery nearby, where gold, lapis, and carnelian lay with lyres and carts in a poignant pageant of farewell. You can trace the route of a funeral party in your head. Musicians led, attendants followed. A queen descended to a chamber, furnished as if for an evening that would never end. The logic was clear. The underworld needs civility, too. When hymns speak of judges below, they do so in a culture that packed a lamp and a cup for the road. Uruk still sprawls like a small country. It once held districts for Inanna and An, with platforms and halls that could hold crowds whose voices would roll like surf across sunlit brick. Uruk gave us writing and the first argument about what a city is for. Walk its mounds, and you can almost hear the clicks of styluses and the creak of loaded carts in lanes lined by mud walls. When a tale says that Inanna sailed home with the gifts of culture, Uruk is the city she made worthy of the cargo. Nippur looks modest from a distance, a tangle of mounded earth with baked brick peeking through. But this was the sacred seat of Enlil, and the place where kings sought the right to rule. The Eka precinct gives the idea of a cosmic council, a floor plan. Courts, storerooms, stairways, and altars are pieces of a working campus, where petitions rose with incense and clay tablets moved like memos between rooms. The thought that the Anunnaki decreed destinies makes sense when you pace the remains of a complex built to turn vows and offerings into outcomes. Lagash lies in the flatlands, like a book left open. Here, the first legal reforms were carved by a ruler who wanted to curb abuses and defend the weak. Texts from this city have the bite of minutes taken at a tense meeting. They speak of fishing rights in canals, of rations, and of officials who had learned to take too much. The gods of a high council mattered here because someone had to hold the line when the strong leaned hard on the rest. Kish was a northern sentinel. The king list gives it the honor of rule after the flood. Its tales still keep the earth color of long years of sun. Armies passed up and down past these fields on their way to quarrels that we know only from centuries of dust. A city that watches a frontier learns to love documents. It also learns which gods to call when you must insist that a promise endure when a throne falls. Shuruppak gives a different sort of chill. This is the city that later storytellers named as the home of the flood hero. Excavations exposed a band of river clay that suggests a catastrophic inundation in the early 3rd millennium. Not the end of the world, but the end of a generation's plans. Read the flood tale after you handle that earth, and it becomes plausible in a new way. A council that decides to reset the world sounds like a poet's answer to a city racing to rebuild. Across the Tigris stands Ashur, a city that would give its name to an empire. Its god, also called Ashur, took up roles once filled by older southern powers. Palaces rose along the river with courtyards where kings displayed reliefs of hunts and battles in long, cool corridors. Their scribes kept omen lists and rituals, because even a state that often wins wants a sense that victories and defeats are more than mere luck. Here the old title Anunnaki still appears, now as part of a wider ledger that includes the fortunes of campaigns and the seating arrangements of conquered gods. On a bend of the Euphrates lay Mari, a river hub where palaces held hundreds of rooms and archives bulged with letters. The tablets there record kings sending messengers with gifts and threats, governors complaining about barley shortfalls, and priests reporting omens from sky and sheep. The Anunnaki enter these lines as witnesses, a shared language of authority that let one city understand another's oath. A myth becomes policy when it is useful in a letter that must move men and grain. Nineveh and nearby Nimrud take you into the rooms of Ashurbanipal. His library hoarded knowledge with a zeal that still startles. It kept the epic of Gilgamesh and the rituals that named the gods in the right order so that a plea would find its target. In these shelves, the Anunnaki survived the fall of the cities that first named them. The kings who carved lions kept the songs of older priests because the words still worked. Then there is Babylon, a city that insisted on being the center of whatever world it belonged to. Its processional way ran between walls, faced with glazed brick in the color of deep sky. The Ishtar Gate wore dragons and bulls that announced serious business within. In the temple quarter, the New Year rites bound calendar to kingship and placed Marduk at the head of a pantheon that still remembered the older family. When lists divide the Anunnaki into those of heaven and those of earth, that neat arithmetic fits a city that loved tallies, schedules, and measured glory. The story is not only in the ground, it lives in cases and drawers. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad holds riches that tell the whole arc, from prehistoric pottery to the tablets that name the high gods. The British Museum houses the flood tablet that made a young reader jump from his chair. The Louvre keeps kings in stone who still stare like men who intend to be obeyed. Berlin's museums hold a gate that glitters even in modern light. Each gallery is a stop on the same river of objects that began as offerings and records and ended as ambassadors. What you notice as you connect these points is how thoroughly the ideas cling to geography. A god of sweet waters belongs at Eridu because the plain needs fresh water to live. A council that sets destinies belongs at Nippur because every city sent prayers there. Judges of the underworld fit a society that buried its dead with lamps and spoke month rites at graves. The Anunnaki are not floating abstractions. They are titles that took shape where real people dug, counted, swore, and hoped. Methods matter in this map. Archaeologists trowel layer by layer and log each find with the care of a clerk because objects without context can lie. A tablet found in a trash pit near a temple kitchen can teach more about offerings than a tablet found in a dealer's case. Survey teams track canal lines visible from the air and then walk them on foot to see which bends still hold moisture in a spring month. Specialists test bricks for salt to guess why a quarter of a city failed. Out of such patient work comes a better sense of why the people who named the Anunnaki made the choices they did. There is also the living land. Marshes returned in the south after years of loss, and with them returned the look of a world that knew reed boats and water buffalo in channels bright with dragonflies. Farmers still coax grain from soil that shines with salt when you walk at noon. Pilgrims and guards still stand on ziggurat steps and watch wind push dust along the horizon. A story that began 5,000 years ago can still borrow details from an afternoon's walk. When you lay the map on a table and place a finger on each city, the old narrative falls into place without effort. This is the family of the sky, born out of the plain. This is the council that speaks in a temple where a king asks for a year of favor. This is the court below where judges listen to names read in a ritual voice. The Anunnaki are the spine that holds the map together. Follow that spine, and you can travel from a first shrine on a sand spit to a library where a schoolboy learned to copy a floodline. Stand back from the tablets and ruins, and you see a simple pattern. The Anunnaki were the grammar of a civilization that needed order in a land of restless water. Cities named patrons, set calendars, swore oaths, and trusted that a high court would hear. When empires rose, the council was reorganized. When empires fell, the names survived in libraries that outlived their walls. Modern readers borrowed the term for new tales, but the core remained the same. It is a promise that work, law, memory, and fate can be spoken clearly and kept. The story ends where it began, on the plain. A ziggurat step warmed by the sun. A canal bend furred with reeds. A tablet that still carries a thumbprint. The voices behind them are gone, yet the system they built can still be read. It tells us to count carefully, to share burdens, to respect boundaries, and to leave room for mercy. That is not a distant theology. It is a manual for living together.